Hello, I'm Bauman, and in this video, I'm going to be showing you one of the original head simplification models, and this one is from Andrew Loomis. What I love about it is that it's simple and it's generic, and it applies to just about any situation you could find yourself in when you're drawing a portrait. You can use it to establish proportion, construction, and even the perspective of the head. I've personally used it as a jumping off point for developing my own head structure template that I use in all of my blocking courses and portrait lessons. Let's get to the demo so I can show you what makes this particular method so cool and so practical. I'm going to be demoing here a basic Loomis head structure template, and that always starts out with this sphere. The reason that Loomis says he chooses a sphere is because in terms of the geometrical shapes you could start out with, it is one that at the very least resembles most the cranium. In making this circle, of course, it's very easy to test the proportion of your circle to see if you have it about right. Just measure the height versus the width. Here, I wound up pretty precisely on a decent proportion. Now, at this point, we're still in a flat state. And the first thing that Loomis wants us to do is to gain some sense of volume, right? Now, the easiest way to create volume or to create form is by using contour lines. So what he recommends is that we start with a kind of vertical center line for the head. Right? We would think about that ellipse traveling around the back of that sphere. Right? Now this line, of course, we're not going to see. This is around the back of the sphere, but what we do see is this vertical center line to the sphere. And what that tells us, right, if we think about facial symmetry, is that tells us that this head is turned to the left. After that, we start with a horizontal axis. Eventually this is meant to show the brow ridge. When we do the same thing, I want you to both imagine, but also draw through the ellipse so that we can see basically where the eye level that we're looking at this from is. We're looking a little bit down on the head, so we see that brow ridge ellipse. So this then roughly corresponds with the glabella / brow ridge. Now, the next step in making a Loomis head is that you should shave off the sides of the sphere. Now, by that, what we're talking about is to take an ellipse, much like this one, and say basically that we have sliced down the side of the sphere and we have removed kind of shape that would not be unlike this, like this kind of domed piece, right, that we've just cut off from the side of the sphere. Now this ellipse at the side of the head here will line up essentially with the edge of the forehead, or what would be referred to as the temporal line. Even though we are looking at this head from the right-hand side and seeing less of the left-hand side, what we want to do is also mirror that same cleaved edge, that same cut edge of the sphere on the other side. Are you starting to see a theme develop in this? This is a theme of structural symmetry. What we do to one side, we also do to another side. And in this way, we ensure that the head that we're building has infused in it that sense of structural symmetry. Now, this horizontal axis here actually becomes important, and I'm going to replace this dotted line that I made a nice clear cross. Because the next thing that we're going to do is transform this from a cranium into something that also has the rest of the skull or the rest of the head attached to it. We're going to continue this vertical center line here pretty much straight down. Now that vertical center line is going to terminate here in the chin. I'll talk a little bit later about the length of this and the proportions that Loomis recommends for the head. The next steps can come in a variety of orders based on who you see doing it, but I'm going to go ahead and start to indicate the side plane of the face here, coming down to the chin. Next thing I want to do is find the jaw, which here is relatively easy, right? So at just about the halfway point of this ellipse, we have this vertical axis coming down. That should be more or less where we find the jaw on an average head. Now, this is a really important point to remember. Just about everything about the Loomis head, or at least where we're starting from here, is about a generic head. It's not about a super specific one that comes later. After that, I'm gonna make that front plane of the face, that mirroring edge, to the one that I placed out here on the left-hand side. You could do this before or after, but let's go ahead and place the nose. The brow ridge, like this, should have a corresponding parallel line at the bottom of this ellipse, which will indicate more or less where the nose will hit along that vertical center line. Now, in establishing the proportions of the head, something that Loomis does that maybe is of debatable merit, if you ask me, is that he wants to establish the thirds of the face. So from the chin to the bottom of the nose, from the bottom of the nose to the brow ridge. And then from the brow ridge, he likes to include what he refers to as the hairline. Now, I guess that a hairline is a useful landmark for a really generic average head. Maybe it starts to communicate a major plane shift in between the top of the cranium and the front of the forehead. But in my opinion, and you can kill me in the comments if you want to, but in my opinion, it's a little bit of an arbitrary marker unless you're drawing purely from imagination, whereas when I'm building a head, I usually tend to draw from a reference. The location of the ear as it corresponds to the line of the jaw back here, right? So we have the brow ridge coming across here and then slicing back on a flat axis. We have the line of the mandible kind of coming up to the bottom of this vertical axis. Essentially, the ear should sit somewhere in that vicinity on a slightly backward tilting axis. So if we make a shape just about like this, we can give that sense of the location of the ear, and we're drawing a Loomis head from this 3/4 angle. Now, in addition to that, I like to indicate the zygomatic bones or the cheekbones and where they correspond to this block-in structure. It's not a required step for a Loomis head, but I think it's nonetheless a very interesting one to do because it gives just a little bit more realism to your initial block-in, maybe helps you recognize things slightly better than you would without it. Also lets you show that classic back edge of the eye socket. Eventually that zygomatic bone would go right back here to the external auditory meatus, which is your ear hole. And then also the back edge of the forehead comes a little bit forward from where we find that ellipse. We could also, just for the heck of it, we can project a nose outward from here. Now, thinking about the nose, we know that the bottom plane of the nose, at the center of it, we have the septum, and that hits right along this center line. And we also know that the glabella sits here, also along the center line and the brow ridge. From there, it's really easy to just project a plane outward to show the top plane of the nose, to show where that plane turns. Before you know it, you have a nose projecting forward from the head. Now, believe me when I say this is just the beginning of the ride. There's so much more you can do with both the Loomis head block-in template and also just block-in templates in general. But this is enough to allow you to get to a place with your drawing where you could actually exercise your observational skills to get you to a place where your drawing could look really quite specifically like the model. I talked initially about those proportions, right, where Loomis wants you to see the head in terms of these thirds, right? Now, depending upon the orientation of the head, if it's tilting back, if it's tilting forward, you're gonna find that there's a different set of proportions in between these because of foreshortening. But also, from individual model to individual model, we're also gonna find like a lot of divergence between the length of the nose, the length of the bottom third of the face. There's gonna be a lot of differences, and this would be the moment when you want to implement those differences and create something that looks a little bit more from a proportional perspective, like the model that you're drawing. Oh, by the way, this bottom third should have the mouth as well, which is gonna be more or less equidistant in between those two ends.
So let's pause here and recap really quick the various stages of making this Loomis block-in. We want to start out with that circular cranium shape. Add to that a vertical and horizontal line that will take the shape of an ellipse. These give the head a sense of three-dimensionality. After that, we want to shave off the sides of the cranium and add a cross to it. This will become a landmark later on in the drawing. From there, we start to add the shield-shaped front plane of the face that goes from the brow ridge down to the base of the chin and also represents the side planes of the jaw. Following that, we mark out the head in thirds. We go from hairline to brow ridge to bottom edge of the nose to the bottom of the chin. These marks make up the basic proportions of the face, and of course, they do change if the head tilts up or tilts down. At this point, we have a basic Loomis head. What I've decided to do here is to also add a projecting planier nose and also the location of the ear in relationship to the rest of the features of the head. In order for this block-in style to become most useful to you, you're going to need to practice drawing it from different perspectives. So drawing 9, 10, 20, 30 Loomis heads all looking in different directions will be a great way for you to internalize this information and become really effective when you're drawing portraits. If you're looking to learn more about this style of block-in and also other styles of portrait block-ins, you can go to my Patreon page. I run a course there called the In Bootcamp. We focus on exactly these kinds of issues and help you get better at the most important stage of the drawing. To get there, just follow the link at the top of the description of this video. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'm Stephen Bauman, and I will see you next time.